cafeteria, and she really enjoyed reading this book. I know she talks about it. And so here's her presentation that she's worked so hard on.
Thank you, Rachel. As she said, I read my book on Dr. Tatum's book, Why Are All Black Kids Sitting in the Cafeteria? And as I give my presentation, you'll find that this book is applicable to all classrooms, even though I'm an English major. And also you'll find that Dr. Tatum also gives a lot of citations and references to other authors and even people who you all have read for your talks. And so there's no real clear way how to define racism, which is what Dr. Tatum focuses on. So she, like the old saying goes, has more degrees on her than a thermometer. So she was born in September 27th, 1954, so she's currently 62 years old. And you can see where she received all her degrees from her various universities. And she works as a clinical psychologist, administrator, and teacher on the topic of racism in education. And her most recent thing that she's done is she was president of Spelman College, which is an historically black college for women. And she just recently retired from there in 2015, and so she is continuing to give her discussions on race and things at various events such as the Summit on Race Relations. And she also participated in Barack Obama's inauguration. So I'm going to read you a passage out of the introduction of the book to kind of set the pace for what Dr. Tatum is trying to focus on, and it'll also make the starfish on the screen make sense. So, a young girl was walking along the beach. To her amazement, she came upon thousands of starfish. Washed ashore by a storm, they were dying in the hot sun. The girl began to toss starfish back into the sea one by one. After a while, a man approached her. "Little girl," he asked, "what are you doing?" "There are thousands of starfish on this beach. You cannot possibly hope to make a difference." The girl was discouraged and dropped the starfish in her hand. But a moment later, she bent down, picked up the starfish again, and tossed it as far as she could into the sea. She turned back to the man, smiling brightly. She said, "I made a difference to this one." Inspired joined her. A crowd had gathered and had soon joined in. Before long, there were hundreds of people tossing starfish back into the sea and calling out, "I made a difference to that one." After a while, their calls subsided. The girl looked up. To her amazement, she saw no starfish on the beach. Each one had been tossed back into the sea. And so, from this passage and from this quote by Dr. Tatum, each one of us has the power to make a difference, and collectively we can create a more just and peaceful society. So, based on racism, her point of view is that it all starts with us. And so she talks about the problems of what is racism, and it all stems back to the stereotypical images of what children know and what they're taught at the beginning of, growing up. And also, omitted information becomes our downfall. So when we start talking about race, and say, because she gives this example, one of her students said that she was in the store one day and asked her mom why a little girl was dirty. And she said, "Well, the girl's not dirty, honey. She just has, more melanin in her body than you." And so by saying this, she acknowledges that the child is inquisitive. Instead of just brushing it off, she tells her the real reason. And so that is where the omitted information comes in. And not enough experience is made available to teachers who are teaching in mixed-race classrooms. So say, because on the next slide I have a statistic about where my school stands as far as demographics, as far as in comparison to Starkville High. And so if the teacher from my high school came to Starkville, they wouldn't have as much experience with the demographic levels of Starkville. So this is the statistics. So my school, I'm from Biloxi, and you can see on the bottom here where the percentages fall. So I have a lot more mixture of demographics in my school than, say, Starkville. Starkville has 64.8% of their students as African American population. So essentially, these statistics are spun on their head because the statistics for white Americans is just the opposite for Starkville. Defining racism, again, this is where she starts talking about all her other citations and references to other people on the subject of this matter. She says that there's a difference between racism and prejudice. So racism would mean the system of advantage based on race, by what David Willman says. And this means that as white Americans, you experience benefits such as job benefits. You don't have to walk in a store and get funny looks because you think that somebody thinks that you're going to be stealing anything or anything like that. Also, she quotes prejudice plus power, so this means that you have some kind of inclination towards a race, and also you experience the power of not getting the funny looks in public and things of that nature. She says to treat people as individuals and not as a racial group, so you don't apply an African American to the group of African Americans. You apply them as Daisha, or you say, me, I am a human and I'm a white American, I'm not just a white American. And so she asked the question, can people of color be racist? And based on her definition of the system of advantage, the answer would be no, because African Americans do not. They do not experience this system of advantage. They don't have the advantages that white Americans do. This goes for Native Americans, Asian Americans, and Mexican Americans. And she compares active and passive racism as a moving walkway in an airport. So she says if you are moving in the direction of the walkway and you're not actively moving backwards, trying to alleviate the racism in our society, then you're just being passively racist. And so you can say all day long, oh, well, I don't have any, prejudices toward one group or another, but if you're not doing anything about it, then you are part of the problem. And we just define it as a racial social construct because we are the ones that feed into it. So another example in the book, she always talks about how she talks to her little boy about racism. She gives the example of here is a brown egg and here is a white egg. And if you crack them open, they're the same on the inside. So that is the graphic. And so she also defines otherness. And you see those here. And then the oppressions that go along with them, she calls isms. And the more isms you have, the more you experience, the problems with society. There you get the crazy looks and all of that. And then there are dominant and subordinate groups. So, and she also says that dominant groups know a lot more about what subordinate groups do not have, and subordinate groups do not know hardly anything about what dominant groups have because they don't experience that. Also, once children start noticing these differences, they do the resistance thing. So whoever read Cole for I Will Not Learn From You, the quote, to agree to learn from a stranger who does not respect your integrity causes a major loss of self, explains how they lose their self-esteem if they're having to be put in a situation where they're minorities. And they start noticing this really young, so 6 to 7 years old, so right when they start getting into school. But they don't necessarily start the negative thoughts. They just notice that, oh, I'm different from this person, oh, I get treated differently from this person. And so they start asking the question, why can't I be white, why can't I be like them, or so on and so forth. And so when you get into adolescence, which is basically who we're going to be teaching as secondary teachers, they go through these different statuses, which Marcia says. They diffuse, foreclose, moratoria, and achieve. So they go through the different explorations of these roles, and when people say that they put on a different mask every day, this is what she's talking about, or he's talking about. So the diffuse, they go through little explorations, so they notice the differences and things like that, but they don't really question them. And then the foreclose is when they commit to roles or behaviors. So like they see their friends doing something that fits into the norm, so that's what they foreclose to. And then the moratorium is when they actively explore the roles and beliefs and things like this. So this is when they get a little bit older and more towards their 17, 18 years. And then when they finally achieve, this goes through a whole long exploration. They commit to their identity and what they're going to be. And so this is when people run into the looking white or the sounding white stereotype, and the oppositional identity can interfere with academic achievement. So they go through the whole process of, well, I don't want to, be the black kid in the classroom who sounds smart and then I'm too cool for school. Mm-hmm. And so this quote really hit home for me because I have had many black friends. Because being from Biloxi, I experienced more diversity than people in North Mississippi from what I have seen. And so it says that little burden, that constant burden of you always having to strive to do your best and show that you can do it just as much as anybody else. Your white friends can't understand that, and it's really hard to communicate to them. So this is a high school senior, And I have had many friends tell me this, like, you don't get it, you don't understand. And so this is what we have to address in our classroom, that you have to make sure that everyone is treated equally. So I have this video to more pertain to my major as an English major, because when you get to the sounding white and looking white thing, it mainly deals with their language. And so you run into problems with African American vernacular English, and this talks about it.
If I'm in the comfort of my own home, if I'm with my friends or whatever, I may say something that I know is grammatically incorrect, or that that isn't a word, but I don't care. I'm with my friends, they know what I mean. But when I step outside my house, depending on where I am, if in this type of environment or any business environment, or if I'm at the bank or if I'm at the grocery store, I gotta make sure I articulate myself well for society reasons, for the fact that I need to make sure they know exactly what I'm talking about, or they understand exactly the point I'm trying to get across.
The two guys walk up together and they might dab each other off and say, "What's up, son?" But that mean homeboy, "What's up, brother?" You might be my ride or die, my homie, my ace, my broski, we say stuff like that, and they'll be like, "Okay, why you can't just say friend? Hi, friend,"
It's like we finna talk our own way, and it's just like we have to have some form of individuality, in the way that we speak. And so using slang or using this so-called inferior English, as they would say, is definitely some type of form of rebellion. And it's also just a form of expression for us to be able to express ourselves in some type of unique way.
Trying to be successful in this world, you feel as though you have to be able to speak on their terms and behave on their terms. So it's twofold. It's this need to fit in, and there's also pressure put on from the other side. If you don't speak and appear in ways that are similar to us, then you probably are not that good. If you speak in that other, you use slang words, and you speak in African American, then you maybe not that smart, maybe not as educated. So you're forced to assimilate.
And trying to speak with someone else that's like in a corporate world, they would look at those kind of things, and it depends on what kind of jobs that you're looking for. And grammar is a big thing in this society. So speaking correctly, that's proper English,
A lot of corporations or a lot of jobs and stuff like that, if you speak too heavy slang, like a lot of slang terms, like they'll look at you like you a thug, or they'll look at you like, like you a gangster, and that you're not properly educated, or that you're not as smart. And a lot of times it don't really have anything to do with that. It's just the environment that they was brought up in.
I feel like even in our own community, you get a lot of people that judge us or that are harsh on us just because of where they were growing up, or who they grew up around, or who they surround themselves around.
If you are born African American, you have to prove that you are not one of the bad ones. You have to prove that you are not lazy, that you can fit in, that you can do this. So and how those outsiders assess what type of person you are is based on a lot of things. One is the language.
So that video encompasses all that we were just talking about you can't just judge someone based on how they speak or how they look or anything like that. So as teachers, we have to understand that in our classrooms. We have to create an environment where there is no judgment, because African Americans, Native Americans, Mexican Americans, they all understand that they are being looked at and judged based on how they look and sound. And so we have to, as teachers, make sure that our environment is safe for them. And then this is more than just black and white, as we were talking about Latin America and African Americans. All races, they deal with this. So for many of the races that are not African Americans, such as the Latin American